Back now live on MSNBC, and stunning new video shows former felons being arrested in Florida by an election police force created by the state's governor, Ron DeSantis. The body cam video released by the Tampa Bay Times and the Miami Herald from August shows the complete confusion as police issued the arrests for alleged voter fraud. Florida had restored the rights of many former inmates back in 2018, but not for those accused of murder or felony sex offenses. The majority of the people arrested that day were registered Democrats or black, according to the Times and the Herald.
Why would y'all let me vote if I wasn't able to vote?
I'm not sure, buddy. I don't know.
And then why now? This happened years ago. Why now? Why me?
Dude, I've never seen these charges before in my entire life.
Joining me now is NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, anchor and moderator of Washington Week on PBS, and former Republican Congressman from Florida, David Jolly. All right, Yamiche, we're together here on set, so let's get to you right away. You've had a chance to speak to the Secretary of State of Florida who defended these arrests. But first, clarify the confusion here and what the law in Florida says about felons' rights to vote.
Peter, well, it's a very confusing time in Florida. Florida's already a confusing state. Having been a native, I can say that. But what you have here in Florida is this back and forth over felons voting. Felons couldn't vote at first, then people pushed to get them voting rights, but they were the people that were carved out were people with felony sex offenses and murderers. They cannot vote. They never can vote in Florida. Then you have these people, felons, who got the right to vote, and people registered. They got voter ID cards. They were able to vote. Some of the people that are now being arrested, and the Florida governor says that it's all of these people that we're seeing on these cameras and these body cameras. They are people who were not allowed to vote ever. They are the convicted murderers and felony sex offenses. But these people say, well, why did you give me a voting card? Why did you give me voting material? Why did you let me register? So in some cases, advocates are saying this is really like giving someone a driver's license and then telling them, oh, by the way, we're arresting you for using that driver's license. As you said, I sat down with the Florida Secretary of State. Take a listen to what he told me and how he defended the state's actions.
What do you say to critics who say that the Office of Election Crimes and Security, what some have called the election police force, that was created to establish a false narrative, a political narrative about a problem that doesn't really exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just completely inaccurate and belies the truth that there are people that vote that aren't entitled to vote. And every single person that votes that shouldn't undermines someone the legal vote of someone else.
Byrd said the unit is looking at the whole state, but he added that there will be more issues in bigger counties like Miami-Dade, Broward, Hillsborough, and Duval.
So it's just a coincidence right now that you're starting with mostly Democratic, heavily populated areas.
I know what you're trying to say, and that's not what I'm saying. Is that's where the volume is. I mean, Miami-Dade County has 1.5 million voters.
So when critics look at that and say you're going after Democratic-led counties, Democratic-leaning counties, your response is
absolutely false.
So there you have the Secretary of State offering a full-throated defense of the state's laws and actions here. But advocates tell me that these people should never have been arrested in the first place. They're thinking that the people that can still have their rights to vote, the felons that are watching this, the ones that are perfectly legal to vote, they're going to be intimidated by watching people get arrested like this. And the Secretary of State also defended the way that these people are arrested, because I talked to some people who said their houses were surrounded by guns for voting.
But the state would also have to show that they willfully committed voter fraud here as well, right?
Certainly, and that's why I've talked to some lawyers who are defending these people who are arrested, who say, we're going to fight these charges in court, because if a state gives you a voter ID and lets you register and does all of these things and basically says you can go out and vote,
and then arrest you,
and drive, and then arrest you, that's a violation.
So, David, let me get your take on this. What do you make of the arrest? Some critics are calling this voter suppression.
Sure. Look, some home state prerogative. I'll say a disgraceful chapter for Florida. This was a political stunt by a governor who has national aspirations and wanted to be seen as a heavy on rooting out voter fraud. And the history here, this is why it is so cruel, Peter. So in 2018, 2/3 of Florida voters said, let's restore rights for felons. The Republican legislature said, well, OK, voters, we heard you, but we're going to pass what's called implementing legislation that says maybe you've done your time, but if you still owe $1,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 in court fees, you're not eligible to vote. The irony here is some of the people that have been targeted for arrest, they registered to vote because their county supervisor of election went to them and outreached to them to say, you're now eligible. There was zero intent for these people to break the law. Republicans have tried to make this hard. DeSantis knows that. DeSantis wanted a political story. He got one, but he did so creating cruelty for people to vote. And yes, it's going to have an intimidation factor for others who might be considering voting on November 8th.
David, let's go to 35,000 feet for a second, talk more widely here. The former Vice President Mike Pence, he's now continuing this balancing act right ahead of a potential run for president. He was at Georgetown University here in Washington yesterday. A student there asked him about former President Trump potentially running for president 2024. I want you to see this and get your take on it. Here's the exchange.
If Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president in 2024, will you vote for him?
Well, there might be somebody else I'd prefer more.
So that definitely wasn't a yes, and it seemed to be the clearest indicator yet that the man you just saw there is eyeing his own presidential run. Your take?
Yeah. Peter, you used the term balancing act. I'd say a vice president trying to have it both ways. He desperately wants to run for president, but it's hard to say Trump shouldn't run if you're Mike Pence, if you're the guy that was his biggest cheerleader for the last 6 years. The reality is there's very little lane for Mike Pence. He probably would finish somewhere in the single digits. He clearly wants to run, but he can't justify supporting Trump the last 6 years and not supporting him this next cycle.
Yamiche, just a couple seconds left quickly. The New York Times poll shows that more than a third of independent voters and a smaller noteworthy contingent of Democrats said they were open to supporting candidates who reject the 2020 elections if the other candidate that they're looking at supports their positions on other topics. What do you make of that?
What it shows me is that we're still in this really tribal part of politics here. There are people who are looking at election deniers and say this is just what the GOP does. 45 states, according to NBC News' research, has people on the ballots this November that are election deniers, and they're still getting the support.
Yamiche Alcindor, appreciate it. David Jolly, thanks for your time and your